Much everyone for joining today's webinar. I am Andrea Polenko. I'm a research scientist at Faunalytics. If you're not familiar with us, we are a research-based organization, and it is our mission to provide animal advocates like yourself with data and evidence to influence your decision-making when it comes to advocating for animals. I have been at Faunalytics for 3 years conducting social science studies. But I'm also an animal advocate, so I have years of experience doing on-the-ground activism, such as vegan outreach, which is why I'm really excited by today's webinar, where we have Wendy from Veganuary joining us. Wendy, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Wendy Matthews, and I'm International Head of Partnerships and Expansion at Veganuary. I oversee our international.
Oh, Wendy, you muted.
Was I muted that whole time?
Not the whole time,
Oh,
just for a couple of seconds there.
okay. Well, I don't know what happened there, but I assume you heard the first bit. So I was just saying I oversee internationalization at Veganuary, and I've been working in the vegan and animal rights movement for more than a decade. I got my start in the sanctuary space. I worked with Farm Sanctuary for about 8 years, and now I'm working at Veganuary. I've been here for 5, and I'm really passionate about finding impactful strategies for creating lasting behavior change. And I'm so grateful to be joining you today. Thanks.
So for today's webinar, I'm just going to give a quick overview of Faunalytics' latest study titled What Vegan Advocates Can Learn from the Social Spread of Quitting Smoking. So I'll just give an overview and some key findings and recommendations, and then we'll follow up with a Q&A for both myself and Wendy. So for this study, we looked at social contagion, which is how behavior spreads from one person to another. So this actually hasn't received a lot of research. And one of the wonderful things about research is that we can actually look at studies from other similar behaviors to help us understand what we could realistically expect for the understudied behavior, which in this case is veganism. So in this report, we looked at the smoking cessation literature, given the similarities between quitting smoking and quitting animal products. So for example, both behaviors are easily influenced by one's environment, as a particular cue can trigger cravings for either food or for nicotine. So let's say in a hypothetical scenario, you're trying to quit smoking or you're trying to go vegan, but you live with someone who is still smoking or consuming animal products. In this scenario, you'd be constantly surrounded by cues that remind you of the behavior that you're trying to change. So for this reason, there's a lot of studies in the health sciences that have investigated the impact of one's spouse, family, and friends on the likelihood of quitting smoking. And like I said before, there has yet to be a wealth of research that has looked at this for veganism. So in this report, we looked at 11 of these studies that look at quitting smoking to generate hypotheses of the social spread of veganism while keeping in mind some key differences between both behaviors. So what did we find with this report? First, we found that romantic partners are the best candidate in one's social circle to influence behavior. For example, people are up to 12 times more likely to quit smoking if their partner also quits. We also found that a non-smoking partner also serves as a good role model for people who want to quit. So we found that people were 4 times more likely to quit smoking if their partner was a non-smoker, while those that were married to current smokers were the least likely to quit. So what does this mean for going vegan? It could suggest that one, individuals in a romantic relationship may be more likely to go vegan together versus individually, which is similar to couples who quit smoking together having the highest chances of success. And two, it may suggest that omnivores may be more likely to go vegan if their partner is vegan already, which is similar to how a non-smoking partner can serve as a role model for a smoking partner. So there's definitely potential here for organizations and researchers to test the impact of diet change interventions that target couples, especially those that compare couples that try to go vegan together versus couples in which a vegan partner serves as a role model for the omnivore partner. So after romantic couples, friends have the highest social influence on quitting smoking. So in one social network analysis, a spouse was 67% less likely to smoke if the spouse had quit smoking. And this likelihood was 43% for mutual friends, 34% for coworkers, and 25% for siblings. So, in other words, people are less likely to change if their peers don't. So, for veganism, again, this could suggest that vegans could influence their friends and coworkers, although we know from another study that vegans and vegetarians are up to 6 times more likely to be friends with vegans than omnivores. So we do recommend that advocates consider maintaining friendships with non-vegans as much as possible to help influence them and spread veganism. Not to mention, new vegans can use the encouragement from veteran vegans to face any challenges that arise as they transition to a vegan lifestyle. So that was like the overview of our key findings and recommendations. I do recommend checking out our report for more. And if you have any questions, now is the time for either myself or Wendy. Wendy, just to kick off the Q&A, I do have a question related to Veganuary. I'm curious to know how your campaign incorporates aspects of people's partners, families, and peers when promoting veganism.
Sure. So I think at the moment, Veganuary's strength really lies in what the study refers to as the dynamic norm. So we create this extremely concentrated moment in time every January where all eyes are on veganism. So not only are millions of people around the world participating in the Veganuary challenge, but then we have media talking about it, we have celebrities supporting it, and we have businesses putting vegan products front and center. So I think this really normalizes vegan and creates this sense that everyone is doing it. But we also do this at the more micro level. So, for example, we run targeted campaigns in certain cities where we try to create a sense of like 360 Veganuary is everywhere. Um, some studies have shown that sometimes it takes up to 27 times to see something before you respond to it. So even with the small budget we have, we just try to concentrate ads and events and restaurant specials all in the same areas to create that multiple reinforcement feeling. But that doesn't totally answer your original question, which is around couples and families. So at the micro level, we do two things. So one is we offer advice and support in the email series for folks who have multiple dietary preferences in a single home. We encourage them to have calm, non-judgmental discourse. We offer tips for how to kind of ease into cooking meals together, and how to lead by example. And then the second way is that we encourage people to invite a friend to sign up with them. And we, provide templates for invitations just to make it fun and easy, because it really is a lot easier with a friend.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. It's actually one of our smaller recommendations in our report is sort of by leading as a positive example as a vegan yourself. So just to kind of create the social norm that veganism is really like a positive lifestyle. There's a lot of negative stereotypes, unfortunately, about vegans that we're unhealthy, weak, or like judgy. So just leading as a positive role model to those around you is something that we also recommend in our report, just to kind of, again, help normalize veganism so it's not seen as like a fringe lifestyle. So I'm trying to see, Jenna, do we have any questions in the chat? If not, I have another question for Wendy. Don't be shy, folks. Oh, Max, I see a hand raised.
Hi, sorry, don't mean to interrupt the flow,
No.
but thank you so much for the session. Enjoyed reading through the report. One of the things that stands out to me most about looking at this movement is how bipartisan it was. And so in a world where we're seeing like a very strong political transition right now, I feel like we're running to a movement-wide inability to effectively message across the divide sometimes. And so I'd be curious if there are any lessons about the bipartisan communication, the ability to communicate these values to conservative and liberal audiences that we can draw into animal advocacy.
That's a great question, Max. Faunalytics, actually, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. We released a report a few months ago looking at conservative values in terms of how to talk to people from those like political parties. I wasn't the lead researcher on it, so off the top of my head, I can't remember which values were identified by those political parties and which you can leverage those norms when you speak to someone who either works for the political party or who identifies as voting for that particular party. But I definitely recommend checking out that report because it goes into full detail about how to have those conversations. Thank you, Jenna, who put the study in the chats. But yeah, Max, I definitely, if you haven't read that study yet, I definitely recommend it's really up your jam with everything you were saying.
For sure. I loved the report, and that sort of
Oh,
actually
you did read
inspired the
it. Okay, cool.
question. And so
Ah,
I was
okay.
curious if you saw anything like in smoking specifically that like enabled it to be more palatable to both sides of the aisle a little bit.
Yeah, I understand now. So the studies that we particularly looked at were called like a social network analysis. So it didn't necessarily look at people's demographics or personal characteristics aside from the type of relationship that the people had when they were trying to quit smoking. So I can't say anything about, about the bipartisan aspect in relation to the study because it just wasn't a characteristic of those studies. Okay, great. Thanks for that question, Max. Wendy, I have one more question for you. I am curious to know when you run Veganuary, if any participants have shared any successes or challenges with you when it comes to their friends and family when they take the pledge.
Yes, so absolutely. Every year we run an annual participant survey and we ask the question, what was your biggest challenge during Veganuary? And in 2024, and this is pretty on par with most years, about 21% of people said dealing with friends and family. So this was the number two most popular response. There's only one other challenge that was cited more often. Just for fun, does anyone want to guess what that was in the comments? The top challenge for participants? I'll just give it a second in case anyone has ideas.
I want to
Okay.
guess. Is that okay?
Yeah, guess
I
away.
actually don't know the answer. I'm gonna guess convenience, though.
Yeah, that in a nutshell it is. So dining out is what they said specifically, but I think that is a convenience issue. And about 30% of participants mentioned that as their biggest struggle. And my guess is that in addition to kind of the menu anxiety of ordering in an unfamiliar way, the social aspect is a part of that too, right? That can be what's challenging is just navigating like, can I share the appetizer? Do I have to ask a bunch of questions if we're ordering together? There's just a lot of social anxiety there as well. So we take this feedback on board every year, and we have a few emails in the series that folks get, which cover approaching social situations, things like responding to confrontation, finding community. But in this movement, we talk a lot about PTC, the price, taste, and convenience. But of course, there's really this other huge factor of social challenges, and that's why I'm so glad these conversations are happening, and for the work that Faunalytics does to really help us identify opportunities.
Thanks for that, Wendy. I see Courtney Dillard has her hand raised. Hello,
Hey
Courtney.
there. Yeah, sorry. I am not surprised that children were not included in the tobacco studies. That's a good sign. But I do think that children have a strong possibility of influencing family dynamics around eating. And so I'm wondering if Veganuary has done anything in terms of family challenges and what the interest is in reaching out to young people who, have consistently demonstrated an interest in animal welfare that's at a higher level than adults.
Yeah, great question. Hi, Courtney. We haven't done much with targeting youth. So we do some work with universities and we've had workplace challenges take place at schools, but just kind of in the scope of what we do now, we don't target the 18 and under audience much. Partly because we don't have health experts on staff. And I think we want to be quite sound in our nutritional advice and gear it specifically towards kids. But all the materials that we have now are catered for adults. So maybe an avenue for the future, but not something we're focused on at the moment.
That's actually similar to a question that Max Broad put in the chat, asking any data on the influence of family, especially children on their parents. So off the top of my head, Max, going back to the study that we just released, it focused on adults, but conducting research on children is really hard because when it comes to informed consent, and then you usually have to ask the parents and all of that. So it's usually like the parents reporting on their children's behavior or food intake, for example. But I know there's studies that have looked at speciesism across children and have compared their levels of speciesism to samples in adults. And of course, like children don't actually they kind of become speciesist over time with these studies. It's really cool body of research. But as for diet change, I'm not super familiar with work that has looked at that. So if anyone in the chat maybe has more knowledge about that issue, feel free to share. Because the only one that comes to mind right now are the speciesist studies.
To say from the Veganuary side, we don't have any quantitative data around this, but I would say just like on the qual side, we get stories a lot from folks who write to us and let us know they went vegan because their kid wanted to do it or vice versa. So there does seem to be a lot of that like interfamilial social impact, but I can't give you any hard numbers, just that it, is something that we hear a lot discussed with our participants.
Yeah, that'd be something that'd be great for more research to look at. Like anecdotally, I went vegetarian at around 14 years of age, and like I know for sure that influenced my household at that time. But yeah, does anyone else have any other questions? Feel free to put it in the chats. Geraldo, sorry if I mispronounced your name. You have your hand raised, I see. Not sure if you are unmuted.
I think that's Hair from
Sorry about that.
MFA.
Can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Yes, thank you so much.
Sorry about that. Yeah, as I was saying, no, you didn't hear me the first time. Sorry.
No.
So I was saying that um, I see so many differences between quitting smoking and quitting animal products that I'm curious if there are any other behaviors or behavior changes that researchers might be looking into that are more closely related to quitting animal products.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. So our original pre-registration wanted to look at exercise, for example, and as well as eating healthy. But we found that there was limited research that, like social network analysis and dyad research that looked into those sort of similar health lifestyle changes. So quitting smoking was the most researched. But I would say probably maybe exercising, but it's we found that the analogies between quitting smoking and quitting meat were the strongest, even though there's obviously like key differences between the two. See someone with their hand? Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna turn on my camera, but I'm having trouble with that, so
It's
I'm just
okay.
gonna speak. So you mentioned in the book how smoking kind of became a social stigma over time. I feel like meat eating isn't gonna be, I mean, hopefully it will be in the future, but do you think the fact that, I know we talked about ties, how romantic partners can influence people, but I will also think that the fact that smoking has a stigma to it also help with that. Do you think veganism will kind of would it ever benefit from that? And if so, how? I
Yeah,
guess.
that's thank you for bringing that up. And that's one of the key differences that we acknowledge as like a limitation of this analogy is that, yeah, the reason why like whole clusters of smokers became non-smokers over time is because the behavior was stigmatized. And with eating meat, it's not stigmatized, it's very normalized. So we do advocate for like a mix of advocacy to kind of change social norms around veganism over time. This isn't going to be something that's quick, unfortunately. Most people in here are animal advocates. You know that change is a slow process, especially when it comes to trying to make something that looks fringe into a popular behavior, which is why earlier I was saying like if you're an individual advocate, like just lead as a role model to kind of like show people around you that it is like a positive lifestyle to kind
Sure.
of combat those negative stereotypes. And also there's also systems level change of advocacy that we still needs to fight for. So one of the ways to help normalize veganism is by um, implementing like plant-based nudges in cafeterias where like the vegan option is like the default, for example. Just architectural changes like that in cafeterias can be really impactful for just normalizing veganism. So it's going to take a lot of work and it's going to take a lot of different advocacy tactics to get there. But yeah, that is unfortunately the biggest limitation of this analogy is like right now, veganism, unfortunately, is kind of stigmatized in itself. Yeah, so.
Yeah, all I know there's been some chat activity, but just a follow-up question. You mentioned a lot about how just living, leading, I don't know, I'm sorry, I need water, but leading by example and systemic changes as positive ways to kind of bring up the social capital of state. What are some of the negative ways you think? Or like, I mean, again, it might be like a little bit opinionated, but I would like your opinion in the sense that what shouldn't you do as a vegan to like, what have you done that doesn't work as a vegan to promote veganism?
What doesn't work? Yeah. Yeah, I think like anecdotally, and we also know there's, well, anecdotally in my experience, but there's also like research out there is like shame-based tactics will push people away. I have definitely been guilty of doing that as a novel advocate on the scene where I went through this whole angry vegan phase. So when I did, demos out in public, we would use shame-based tactics. I know there's organizations out there that that's their thing, but if you do look at the research, that actually does push people away because it judges them on the spot. And so, one of the things that, again, kind of leading by example is just to combat that stereotype that vegans are judgmental. So we do try to tell people to kind of meet people where they're at. So we've done research that has looked at how like the timeline of when people go vegan, and some people, it takes them days, some people it takes them weeks, for others it takes them months to make that transition into veganism. So like accepting people where they're at in their journey will basically, it helps that person know that you're understanding and sympathetic versus being judgmental. So that's just like one thing that I would suggest, going back to your original question of like what not to do. Yeah, I
Thank you
don't know
very
if
much.
Wendy, maybe you, because you run Veganuary.
No, I think that was pretty spot on, right? We always say like welcoming, non-judgmental, just kind of keep it light. I think that the shame-based tactics do work on some people, but don't seem to work on most people. So I think, yeah, I think that's really, really strong advice. And actually, I have a question for you, which I think almost weaves in here. So I was thinking as I was reading this about vaping. So if you look at, Gen Z, um, I mean, their smoking numbers are very, very low. And and I don't have any data on this, but just like knowing some Gen Zers in my life, a lot of them vape, right? So it almost feels like they didn't even consider smoking. They just went right to this other thing, which is, you know, tastier and perceived as healthier. And like, is there anything to learn there, right? It's not just stop eating meat, but it's like, hey, look at this amazing other option we have. Because I was going to say a tactic I do feel like is wildly effective is just introducing people to something that's better and a more obvious choice. So yeah, just curious if vaping came into your thinking at all when working on this.
No, actually, when we did our pre-registration, I think our keywords were specifically just for like smoking cigarettes. So that is such yeah, I wonder if there's more health science research being conducted on vaping. And someone else also kind of mentioned giving up alcohol. That's also a good analogy. I'm not sure how many studies have done social network analysis on either vaping or giving up drinking, but those are really good health behaviors, because another person was asking about other health behavior changes that we can potentially look at as an example. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Wendy. And also on that topic, I know there's another organization, Animal Think Tank, has recently looked at a campaign that targets Gen Z to quit smoking and vaping. So like their report was more about like the messaging tactics and what we can learn from it. So that's also a really cool report. If people are interested in that, those analogies, definitely recommend checking that out. Right, those are some great questions. I'm thinking a lot now about potential future studies. So I do want to thank everyone for asking those. And yeah, if you have any follow-up questions, I will put my email in the chat. I also have office hours where you can just drop in and ask me questions about studies like these. Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this webinar today. I really appreciate your insight.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me and involving me. I thought this was really fascinating. I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. That was great. Really appreciate it.